One morning in the Cook County Circuit Court, the air in room 402 felt heavy and thick with the quiet desperation of those who had nowhere else to turn. But for Judge Everett Langford, that stale, slightly damp air was the sweet perfume of absolute authority. Elevated above the rest of humanity, behind a massive dark mahogany bench, Judge Langford viewed his courtroom not as a hall of justice, but as his personal domain. He was the quintessential portrait of generational privilege. His silver-flecked hair was perfectly coiffed, his judicial robes custom-tailored to conceal the slight paunch earned from too many expensive steakhouse dinners. Behind him, meticulously hung above eye level, was his framed diploma from Georgetown University Law Center, a credential his father's hefty endowments had helped secure. Judge Langford had never known a day of true struggle, and it showed in the arrogant, dismissive curve of his lips. He did not simply preside over cases. He lorded over them. The docket was overflowing with what he privately referred to as the city's detritus: evictions, minor civil disputes, small claims, and municipal infractions. To him, these were not people. They were annoyances delaying his afternoon tea at the country club. "Next case!" Judge Langford barked, not even bothering to look up from his phone, where he was discreetly checking the stock market. "And keep it brief. I do not have all day to listen to sob stories." The atmosphere in this gallery was suffocating. The bailiffs stood like stone gargoyles, long accustomed to the judge's tyrannical moods. The court reporter, a nervous young woman named Emily, kept her eyes glued to her stenography machine, terrified of catching his eye. Judge Langford had a well-known reputation in the legal circuit. He was a bully. He favored corporate lawyers who spoke his country club language and routinely humiliated unrepresented citizens, especially minorities and the working class, who stumbled through the confusing labyrinth of legal jargon. Earlier that day, he had mercilessly berated a young Hispanic mother for improperly filing a motion to delay her eviction, scoffing at her broken English until she left the stand in tears. The cruelty was the point. It was how he maintained control. He believed fear was the only language the lower classes understood. "Bailiff, did you hear me?" Judge Langford snapped, his voice cracking like a whip against the acoustic tiles of the ceiling. "Call the next nuisance before I hold this entire gallery in contempt for wasting my time." The bailiff boomed the next matter on the docket: Apex Towing and Recovery versus Margaret Harlan. The defendant was represented by a proxy. Judge Langford finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. He hated proxies. He hated unrepresented people trying to play lawyer even more. "Well, step up to the podium and speak into the microphone. I am not deaf, though this job makes me wish I were." From the back row of the gallery, a figure stood. She was entirely unassuming. She wore a simple charcoal gray cardigan over a plain white blouse and dark slacks. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, no-nonsense bun, and she carried a battered tan leather briefcase that looked as though it had seen decades of hard use. She walked down the central aisle with a slow, deliberate grace that would have signaled quiet, inherent power to a more observant man. But Judge Langford was not observant. He was prejudiced. He saw a middle-aged black woman in a cheap sweater representing a relative in a trivial towing dispute against a predatory corporation whose sleazy lawyer he played golf with on the weekends. Judge Langford leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, steepling his fingers. A condescending smirk danced on his face. This was going to be easy. This was going to be fun. He loved tearing apart people who thought they had a fighting chance. "State your name for the record," Judge Langford sighed, projecting extreme boredom. The woman reached the podium. She did not nervously shuffle her papers or clear her throat. She simply looked up, her dark, piercing eyes meeting Judge Langford's cold blue ones. "My name is Lydia," she said softly. yet her voice carried an unusual resonance that easily reached the back of the room. "I am here on behalf of my aunt, Margaret Harlan, regarding an unlawful seizure of property by Apex Towing." Judge Langford scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically for the benefit of the smirking corporate lawyer at the plaintiff's table. "Unlawful seizure. Oh, we have a legal scholar in the house. This should be entertaining. Proceed, Lydia, but keep it brief. My patience is already exceptionally thin." Lydia did not rise to the bait. The sneer, the eye roll, the condescending quotation marks around her name. She absorbed it all with the serene detachment of a granite cliff face weathering a light drizzle. She opened her battered briefcase and extracted a single neatly tabbed manila folder. "Your Honor," Lydia began, her tone even, measured, and entirely devoid of the trembling deference Judge Langford usually demanded. "On the night in question, Apex Towing removed my aunt's vehicle from a legally zoned residential parking space. According to the Illinois Vehicle Code, specifically regarding commercial relocation of trespassing vehicles." "Stop," Judge Langford interrupted, holding up a manicured hand. He leaned forward, his brow furrowed in exaggerated incredulity. "Did you really just come into my courtroom and try to quote the Illinois Vehicle Code to me? Me?" "I am establishing the legal foundation for the defense, Your Honor," Lydia replied smoothly. "The statute clearly mandates that warning signage must be visibly posted for a minimum period prior to a tow in a residential zone. We have date-stamped photographic evidence that Apex Towing erected the temporary no parking sign shortly after the vehicle was towed." The corporate lawyer for Apex, a slick man in an expensive suit named Marcus Hale, jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay. The defendant is not a sworn witness and she is not an attorney of record. She is just a relative trying to save a few bucks." "Sustained," Judge Langford said instantly, slamming his gavel down lightly for effect. He looked at Lydia with unvarnished pity. "Look, Lydia, I know you probably spent the night watching reruns of courtroom dramas and Googling legal terms, but that is not how the real world works. You do not just walk in here with a cell phone picture and accuse a legitimate tax-paying business of illegal seizure." "With respect, Your Honor," Lydia countered, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave and growing colder. "The rules of civil procedure allow for the submission of time-stamped metadata as evidentiary exhibits in small claims. It is not hearsay. It is digital forensics. Furthermore, Apex Towing has a documented history of predatory practices in this specific zip code. A zip code, I might add, that is predominantly lower income and minority." Judge Langford's face turned a deep crimson. The audacity of this woman. She was not cowering. She was not begging. She was challenging him. And worse, she was subtly calling out the racial and economic biases of the system. His system. "Are you accusing this court of bias, ma'am?" Judge Langford demanded, his voice rising and bouncing off the oak-paneled walls. "I am stating facts regarding the plaintiff's business model, Your Honor," Lydia replied, completely unbothered by his rising volume. "Facts that are entirely relevant to whether this court should grant their motion for summary judgment." "I decide what is relevant in my courtroom," Judge Langford roared. The gallery visibly flinched. Emily, the court reporter, typed furiously, her fingers a blur. "You are bordering on contempt, ma'am. You stand there in your little sweater, holding your little folder, and you think you have the mental capacity to debate jurisprudence with a man who graduated top of his class at Georgetown Law." Lydia looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The silence in the room stretched until it felt brittle, ready to snap. She looked at his framed diploma on the wall, then back to his red, furious face. "A Georgetown education is a fine privilege, Your Honor," Lydia said quietly. "But an Ivy League diploma does not grant a judge the right to ignore statutory law, nor does it excuse a fundamental lack of judicial temperament. According to the Illinois Code of Judicial Conduct, a judge shall be patient, dignified, and courteous to litigants. The courtroom let out a collective, silent gasp. Marcus Hale actually dropped his pen. Judge Langford stared at her, genuinely stunned for a fraction of a second. No one spoke to him this way. Lawyers with decades of experience cowered before him. Politicians asked for his blessing. And here was this absolute nobody, this black woman in a cardigan, quoting the judicial code of conduct to his face, like a disappointed schoolteacher scolding a petulant child. The sheer shock quickly morphed into a profound, bubbling rage. Judge Langford felt the heat rise from his collar. He was going to destroy her. He was going to make an example of her so brutal that no one in this city would ever dare cross him again. He would have her thrown into the county lockup just to teach her a lesson about respect. "Well," Judge Langford whispered, his voice dripping with venom, "aren't we a smart one? You think because you read a pamphlet in the waiting room you can lecture me on the law?" Judge Langford sneered, his gavel hovering like an executioner's axe. The black woman before him did not flinch. She adjusted her simple wire-rimmed glasses. "I think, Your Honor, that the law applies to everyone in this room, even you." Judge Langford threw his head back and laughed, a loud theatrical guffaw designed to humiliate. He looked to the plaintiff's table, inviting Marcus Hale to join in, and the slick lawyer offered a sycophantic chuckle. Several bailiffs, trained to follow the judge's lead, allowed smirks to creep onto their faces. "Oh, the law applies to me," Judge Langford mocked, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye. "Sweetheart, I am the law here. When I sit in this chair, my word is the final word. If I say black is white, it is white. If I say Apex Towing owns your aunt's rust bucket, they own it. And if I decide you are a disruptive, insolent nuisance, I can have you jailed for contempt in an instant." Lydia stood perfectly still. To Judge Langford, her silence looked like the shock of a defeated animal, realizing it had walked into a trap. In reality, it was the calculated patience of a grandmaster watching an amateur make a fatal move on the chessboard. "Is that your official legal standard, Your Honor?" Lydia asked. "That your word supersedes the written statutes of the state of Illinois? I just want to be certain the court reporter has your exact philosophy on the record." Judge Langford glared at the court reporter. "Strike that last exchange from the record, Emily." "Do not strike it," Lydia said sharply, her voice suddenly cracking like a bullwhip and echoing with undeniable, startling authority. Emily's fingers froze over her machine, caught between a rock and a hard place. "Excuse me?" Judge Langford practically spat, rising slightly from his chair. "Did you just give an order to my clerk in my courtroom?" "I am reminding the court of its legal obligation, Your Honor," Lydia said, her gaze locking onto Judge Langford like a laser. "Under the Court Reporters Act, a judge may not unilaterally order a court reporter to strike an on-the-record exchange simply because the judge realizes he has just confessed to an abuse of power." "Abuse of power?" Judge Langford was almost hyperventilating now. The veins in his neck bulged against his white collar. "You insolent, uneducated! I have dealt with thousands of people like you. People who think the system owes them something. You come in here with your entitlement, thinking you can outsmart a man who has dedicated his life to the law. You are nothing. You are a proxy for a squatter who could not be bothered to pay a parking ticket. And you think you can walk into my kingdom and dictate procedure?" Judge Langford pointed a trembling finger at the bailiffs. "Bailiff, bring out the handcuffs. I am citing this woman for direct criminal contempt of court. A period of confinement in Cook County Jail, effective immediately." The two heavily armed bailiffs at the back of the room hesitated. There was something intensely wrong about the situation. The woman was not yelling. She was not violent. She was not even flustered. She exuded a terrifying calm. "Your Honor," Lydia said, her voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register. "Before you execute that order, I highly recommend you review the precedent set in re Betco. Direct criminal contempt requires conduct that is calculated to embarrass, hinder, or obstruct a court. Citing the law and asking for it, to be applied fairly, is not an obstruction of justice. It is justice. I do not care about Betco, Judge Langford screamed, losing all semblance of professional decorum. I do not care about your little codes and your little statutes. You come into my courtroom dressed like you are going to a PTA meeting and you disrespect me. Me? I know your type. You think you are untouchable because you know a few buzzwords. Well, I am going to show you what real power looks like. Bailiffs, I said cuff her. As the bailiffs took a reluctant step forward, their heavy boots thudding against the carpet, Lydia slowly reached into her battered briefcase. Watch her hands, Judge Langford yelled, suddenly paranoid. She might have a weapon. Lydia pulled out a pair of sleek black reading glasses and a heavy gold-embossed leather credential wallet. She placed them deliberately on the wooden podium. The dull thud of the heavy wallet seemed to echo in the silent room. I do not have a weapon, Judge Langford, Lydia said, her tone shifting from polite civilian to absolute chilling command. But I do have an explanation. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. The bailiffs had frozen mid-step. Marcus Hale was staring at the gold seal on the leather wallet Lydia had produced. Even from across the room, the intricately stamped crest of the state of Illinois was unmistakable. Judge Langford, however, was too blinded by his own rage and ego to see the warning signs. He thought the wallet was some sort of fake badge, a sovereign citizen prop, or a desperate bluff. What is that? Judge Langford sneered. Are you going to show me a library card now? A membership to the ACLU? Put your hands behind your back, ma'am. You are going away. Before I do, Lydia said, opening the leather wallet but keeping it facing herself. I want to ask you a few direct questions, Judge Langford, and I want you to answer them on the record for posterity. I do not answer to you, Judge Langford scoffed. Oh, but you do, Lydia replied smoothly. Rule 2.2 of the Code of Judicial Conduct mandates impartiality and fairness. You just stated on the record that you believe my type comes in here with entitlement. Could you clarify for the record what you mean by my type? Judge Langford grinned a feral, ugly grin. He was going to enjoy destroying her. People who look for loopholes instead of taking responsibility. People who think the rules of society do not apply to them because they can scream oppression. I see. Lydia nodded, her face an unreadable mask. And you also stated that you do not care about the statutes or the precedents I cited. You stated that your word supersedes the law. Is it your standard practice in Cook County Circuit Court to ignore the Illinois compiled statutes when they conflict with your personal mood? My personal judgment, Judge Langford corrected arrogantly, puffing out his chest. My judgment is honed by decades of elite education and experience. I know when a case is frivolous. I know when a defendant is lying. I do not need to read a statute book to know that your aunt was parked illegally and that you are just here to waste taxpayer money. Even when presented with photographic evidence to the contrary, Lydia pressed. Evidence can be doctored, Judge Langford dismissed with a wave of his hand. My gut instinct cannot. I am the gatekeeper of this court, and my gut says you are guilty. She is guilty, and Apex Towing gets their money. Now, are you done with your little deposition, or do I need to add another period of confinement to your sentence? Lydia slowly closed the leather wallet. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her mouth. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator that had finally trapped its prey in an inescapable corner. I have everything I need, Judge Langford, Lydia said softly. Emily, did you get all of that? The court reporter, trembling, sir. The nod. Yes, ma'am. Good, Lydia said. Enough of this circus, Judge Langford barked, slamming his gavel so hard the wood dented. "Bailiffs, if you do not have her in cuffs immediately, you will be joining her in a holding cell." The bailiff stepped forward, one reaching out to grab Lydia's arm. "I would not do that, officer." A deep, booming voice echoed from the back of the courtroom. Everyone spun around. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom had swung open. Two men wearing impeccably tailored dark suits and earpieces strode into the room. They moved with the terrifying synchronized precision of highly trained federal agents or elite state police. Following closely behind them was a man Judge Langford recognized instantly. Reginald Crowe, the chief administrative judge for Cook County. A man who practically held Judge Langford's career in the palm of his hand. Reginald Crowe looked pale, sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically toward the podium where Lydia stood. "Judge Crowe," Judge Langford stammered, his bravado evaporating in a fraction of a second. "What? What brings you to my courtroom?" Reginald Crowe did not even look at Judge Langford. He power-walked down the center aisle, brushing past the bewildered bailiffs, and stopped a short distance from Lydia. To Judge Langford's absolute horror, the chief administrative judge of the county bowed his head in a gesture of profound respect. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor," Reginald Crowe said, his voice trembling slightly. "The security detail informed me there was a slight delay in your observation schedule. Is everything all right?" Judge Langford's brain short-circuited. "Your Honor? Why was Reginald Crowe calling this woman Your Honor?" Lydia picked up her leather wallet, flipped it open, and turned it so it faced the bench. The gold badge gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Above it, an ID card bore her photograph and a title that made the blood instantly drain from Judge Everett Langford's face, leaving him as pale as a corpse. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, the kind of deafening quiet that follows a bomb detonation right before the shockwave hits. Judge Langford stared at the gold badge. He blinked once, twice. He tried to swallow, but his throat had turned to sandpaper. The words on the ID card burned into his retinas like staring into the sun. Lydia Harlan, Chief Justice, Illinois State Supreme Court. I do not understand," Judge Langford croaked. The booming, tyrannical voice that had terrorized the courtroom for years was reduced to a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. Lydia unbuttoned the top button of her gray cardigan, seemingly shrugging off the persona of the helpless niece, and stood at her full commanding height. The unassuming woman was gone. In her place stood a titan of jurisprudence, radiating absolute, unyielding authority. "Let me help you understand, Judge Langford," Chief Justice Lydia Harlan said, her voice now ringing with the full weight of the highest court in the state. "For the past several months, the Judicial Inquiry Board has received numerous complaints regarding your conduct on the bench. Complaints of racial bias, socioeconomic discrimination, blatant disregard for due process, and horrific verbal abuse of pro se litigants." Judge Langford gripped the edges of his mahogany bench, his knuckles turning white. The room was spinning. This had to be a nightmare. He was Everett Langford. He went to Georgetown. He golfed with the mayor. "Normally the board sends an investigator," Lydia continued, pacing slowly in front of the podium and commanding the room effortlessly. "But when I read the transcripts, when I saw how you systematically dismantled the dignity of the people you were sworn to serve, I decided I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know if a judge in my state was truly as rotten, as corrupt, and as deeply arrogant as the complaints suggested." She stopped and looked directly into his terror-stricken eyes. "My Aunt Margaret is a real person. She did get towed. But I took her place today to see how you treat someone you believe has no power, no money, and no voice." "Chief Justice," Judge Langford stammered, standing up, his knees shaking so violently they knocked against his desk. I had no idea who you were. If I had known..." "If you had known..." Lydia cut him off, her voice cracking like thunder. That is precisely the point, Everett. Justice is blind. It should not matter if I am the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court or a struggling mother working 3 jobs. The law demands equal protection. You do not treat people with dignity because of their title. You treat them with dignity because they are human beings standing in a court of law. Marcus Hale, the corporate lawyer for Apex Towing, was slowly sliding his chair backward, trying to physically distance himself from the radioactive fallout. You confessed to ignoring statutes, Lydia stated coldly, ticking off his offenses on her fingers. You confessed to issuing rulings based on personal bias. You ordered a court reporter to alter an official record to cover your tracks, and you attempted to jail a citizen without due process merely for citing the law. You did not just break the code of judicial conduct, Judge Langford. You shattered it. On the record, Judge Langford looked desperately at Chief Judge Reginald Crowe. Reginald, please. It was a bad day. You know me. We are friends. The stress of the docket, Reginald Crowe took a massive step back, holding his hands up. Do not address me, Everett. You are on your own. Lydia turned to the court reporter. Emily, I want the transcript of this morning's entire session expedited and securely transmitted to the Judicial Inquiry Board promptly. Yes, Chief Justice, Emily said, sitting up straighter, a look of profound vindication crossing her face. Lydia turned back to Judge Langford. Everett Langford, by the authority vested in me as the Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, and acting in conjunction with the emergency powers of the Judicial Inquiry Board, you are hereby suspended from the bench, effective immediately, pending a full evidentiary hearing for your permanent disbarment and removal. Judge Langford gasped, clutching his chest. You cannot just— I can, Lydia said quietly, and I just did. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and flawlessly executed. It was the absolute manifestation of karma delivered with surgical precision. Bailiffs, Chief Justice Lydia ordered, looking at the 2 men who had almost handcuffed her minutes prior. Escort Mr. Langford to his chambers to collect his personal effects, and then escort him out of the building. He is no longer authorized to be in the restricted areas of this courthouse. The bailiffs, realizing they had just narrowly avoided arresting the highest-ranking judge in the state, moved with incredible speed. They practically sprinted up to the bench. Sir, step away from the bench, the taller bailiff said, his tone devoid of the deference he had shown Judge Langford all morning. Judge Langford looked like a deflated balloon. His expensive robes suddenly looked like a clown costume. He stumbled down the steps of his throne, his hands shaking violently. He looked at the gallery. The people he had terrorized, the minorities, the working poor, the helpless, were watching him with wide eyes. Some were smiling. A woman in the second row, the Hispanic mother he had berated earlier, was holding her hand over her mouth, tears of relief in her eyes. My pension, Judge Langford mumbled incoherently as the bailiff grabbed his arm. My career, my family's name. As Judge Langford was humiliatingly marched out of his own courtroom by his own security, Chief Justice Lydia took a deep breath. She looked at Chief Judge Reginald Crowe. Judge Crowe, you will assign a replacement judge to handle this docket immediately, and I want a full review of every summary judgment Langford has issued in recent years. If we find that he has systematically railroaded defendants in favor of corporate plaintiffs, there will be a federal civil rights investigation. Yes, Chief Justice, right away. Reginald Crowe nodded frantically, wiping his brow. Lydia then turned to the terrified corporate lawyer Marcus Hale. As for Apex Towing, this case is dismissed with prejudice, and you can inform your client that the State Attorney General's office will be receiving my personal recommendation to audit their towing practices in this district. If they towed my aunt's car illegally, I shudder to think how many ordinary citizens they have stolen from. Marcus Hale swallowed hard, packing his briefcase with shaking hands. Yes, Your Honor. Lydia picked up her battered leather briefcase. She buttoned her gray cardigan back up. In an instant, the terrifying titan of justice folded away, and she was once again just a woman in a sweater. But the energy in the room had fundamentally changed. The air felt lighter, cleaner. The suffocating weight of Judge Langford's tyranny had been eradicated. She walked down the center aisle, but this time the gallery parted for her with profound reverence. As she reached the double doors, Emily, the court reporter, called out softly, "Chief Justice." Lydia paused and looked back. "Thank you," Emily whispered, speaking for every person in that room and every person Judge Langford had ever crushed. Lydia offered a small, genuine smile. "The law is a shield, Emily. Never let anyone convince you it is only a sword." By midday, the story had leaked. By evening, the transcript had hit the local news. The viral sensation of the arrogant legacy judge trying to jail the chief state Supreme Court justice became a national headline. Judge Langford's face was plastered across every network. His country club revoked his membership to avoid the scandal. His prominent friends stopped returning his calls. In the following months, stripped of his robe, disbarred, and publicly disgraced, Everett Langford was forced into an early, pensionless retirement, left with nothing but his framed Georgetown degree and the bitter taste of his own medicine. Karma had come knocking, and she was wearing a gray cardigan. Karma has a way of finding those who believe they are untouchable. And Judge Langford learned the hard way that true power does not need to shout. It just needs the truth. Justice Lydia's quiet dignity dismantled a lifetime of arrogance in a matter of moments, proving that you should never judge a book by its cover, especially in a court of law. If you enjoyed this satisfying story of instant karma and justice being served cold, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Do not forget to share this video with your friends who love a good underdog story where the arrogant get exactly what they deserve. Finally, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic tale of truth, karma, and ultimate vindication. What would you have done if you were in Justice Lydia's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.